Let's get started. Welcome to and mahalo for joining us on another webisode of Aloha Rising. Just to familiarize ourselves with this format and this show and what we're doing. Aloha Rising was launched last year as a means to reach out to the community and share mana'o and ike around the topic of civic engagement. And, we pivoted from doing in-person workshops to virtual workshops, given the circumstances with the pandemic. And it's really proven to be a valuable resource for us to reach community and share information that we often don't get too many opportunities to talk about. And to invite experts like we have today, and super, extremely smart and talented folks who are committed to service and serving the Lahui. And, this space is incredibly special to share with people like the panelists that we have today. And so we're making the most of this virtual platform and trying to spark conversations and dialogue around what civic engagement means in our community. So this latest round of episodes, which this will be the last one for a while. We're going to take a break for at least a few weeks. But this last round was focused on the various tools in the toolbox. Last year leading up to the elections, we talked a lot about voting and voter engagement and some important issues. We highlighted different work happening in the community so that we could discuss why we should be voting and why we should be engaged. What's important to us when we start to, hold this space, in whether it's in leadership or it's advocacy, why are we there? Really trying to think a lot about that and converse with each other about why it's important for us to exercise our agency in terms of civic engagement. So this last round, we focused on other tools aside from voting. So we've talked about legislative advocacy. We've talked about serving on the neighborhood boards here on Oahu, which is real community-based, ahupua'a-centric, governance of resources. And now we're going to talk about boards and commissions. There are boards and commissions, government boards and commissions at the state level and the county levels. And we have folks here today, panelists joining us that serve in both state and county positions. We've asked, we're gonna talk about what these boards and commissions do, and again why it's important to engage from both a service as availing ourselves to serve as members, but also to the advocacy that takes place at these boards and the decisions that are made and why it's important for us to stay abreast. So with that said, I'm going to introduce our panelists today. I'm very excited to have all of you, and mahalo nui to all of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us today and have this conversation. So I'll start off with our very own Hina, who works at OHA with us as a community outreach advocate, but is also the chair of the Oahu Island Burial Council. So Hina, can you just please introduce yourself and share a little bit about the role of, your role on the Burial Council and what the Burial Council's kuleana is.
Oh yeah, mahalo Davis. Te aloha nui a katoa pauloa e te anaina katoa e launa nei. Mahalo nui a o kipa ana mai. O au no o hina lei moana wa Ankalu, and I come to you sharing a moment about the hat that I'm wearing as Oahu Island Burial Council, not only a representative, but I'm currently serving as the chair. And it has been a tremendously rewarding journey that I had no clue as to what it would have taught me and what it would have brought to me. Getting into something like an island burial council, it requires an individual to have a desire and an interest, as well as hopefully and ideally some cultural knowledge, even better, to have knowledge of our language, although not a requirement. There have been many different people who have served on borough councils that didn't necessarily have the strongest background in language or culture. But most importantly, the understanding that advocating for our iwi kupuna, advocating for people whom have gone before us, it is first and foremost. And so being a part of the Borough Council involves a very simple application process. You can find that application on the oha.org website. And when you get into the search box on the website, you type in Island Burial Council, and it will take you to the next page that allows you to fill out an interest form and submit forward. So, you know, Davis, shall I continue on a little bit more?
Let's get the introductions for the other panelists, and then we'll come back to we're going to talk a little bit more about the kuleana, the burial councils. Next up, we have Na'alehu Anthony, who currently serves on the Honolulu County Board of Water Supply. So mahalo, Lehu, for joining us. Can you share a little bit about what you do and the kuleana that this board shares with our community?
Yeah, so Okamua, nui ko mahalo ya oko pakahia pau na kea mamanawa a kako e hui ai. O wao Na'alehu Anthony no ka'awa mai au, mai kea mokupuni o Ahu. My name is Na'alehu Anthony, and I'm a storyteller, filmmaker. I do some communications work, working on the COVID PAL project right now. And then I just got appointed to the Board of Water Supply just in the last handful of weeks. And, the kind of a funny story, but I think is important to tell is like, when they first were kind of vetting the application, is saying like, oh, why would you want to be on this board? And actually Auntie Maheleni Cypher is still on the Zoom right now. But, when I first got out of high school, she was the comms director over there, and she gave me one of those jobs that were for like, young kids, interns. We did like, follow up with Detect the Leak Week and tunnel tours. And I stayed for a couple of years, and really what it allowed me to do is really not only understand how important the role of the Board of Water Supply is, but just how critical the inner workings of it and how hard people work to be able to make sure that every time we turn on the tap, fresh water comes out. And that's not the case in all places. And fast forward a couple of decades, when I had the opportunity to serve and come on the board, it was really kind of just in that interest of furthering some of that commitment to our natural resources. And I know that on the prep call for this, there'll be a kind of a more robust conversation of how we need to all work towards protecting our natural resources. But this is certainly one way to endeavor in that, by serving and by lending, hopefully some of the expertise that I've gained with being a community advocate, as well as a storyteller and a communicator. So, really looking forward to it, and looking forward to not only learning, but again, lending some of what I've learned over the last couple of decades in this industry.
Right on. Mahalo Lehu.
Because ola ika vai.
Correct.
Right on. Mahalo Lehu. Okay, moving on. Next up, very humbled and honored to introduce his next guest, Ku'ipo Kumukahi, who we all know as an amazing musician and vocalist in Hawaiian music. And she also currently serves as a board member for the Hawaii Tourism Authority. So Ku'ipo, can you please share a little bit more about yourself and the kuleana that your board holds with regard to our lahui and our community? Oh, stay on mute.
Mute. How's that?
Better.
Mahalo. Okay. Mahalo nui, and aloha mai kako. My throat is a little under the weather right now, but Yeah, I've been appointed to the Hawaii Tourism Authority back in 2015. They select a group or different folks that represent different islands as well as those in the industry. And HTA is charged with managing tourism and the benefit to Hawaii. I've learned a lot because at the same time I was appointed to the Hawaii Tourism Authority, I became the Director of Hawaiian Culture and Community Relations at the Hyatt Regency Waikiki Beach Resort and Spa, better known as Pualeilani, the home of Prince Jonah Kuhiokalanena and his wife, Princess Kahanu. And prior to them, King Kalakaua and Queen Kapi'olani. Over time, you learn what goes on, why it goes on, and what you got to do as a kanaka iwi. Most importantly, one of the things that my father taught me is when is it that you are Hawaiian? Is it now, sometimes, or all the time? And I reference that because of what he did on the Ka'ahumanu Highway from Kauai to Keohole Kona. And we can talk about that another time. But I learned a lot from my parents who stood strong for our aina. We come from a place known as Ale'amai at Hiloone, at the Kalawa Papaiko on the Hamakua Coast. We've been on our aina since the 1800s. So my great-grandfather was granted the land and from Kamehameha III. And our kupuna are buried there. Our kupuna iwi are all there. My parents included, and I will be there too. What this does is it gives me good insight and understanding about why we should continue or why we should even advocate to make sure that we are present as Kanaka Maoli. We should never lose presence in where we live and where we are from. And that presence includes standing, whether it's never wrong to stand for who we are and to always be a servant leader, just like our ali'i. I just recently got on the board to our Habitat for Humanity. So that gives me another avenue to look at our population and its economy. And really, how does tourism affect that? And where do we go from here? And I'm just going to be a small voice because there's many more to follow. But I hope I can leave, strong mana'o for the next upcoming generations. And music has been a great part of my life. It's the one thing that kept me close to my parents. I am an only child. My father was a manaleo. Mama was, she understood aina as well as my daddy. And so I think mele was the one thing that my mother made sure I had in my mouth because I couldn't speak Hawaiian, and my father wouldn't teach me. But yet keeping that in my mouth and understanding what is being said in the mele is the documentation of our islands, period. It's not found in any books. It's not found in postcards. It is Hawaii. What's in the mele is Hawaii, is our documentation. So, oia wale no.
Oh, mahalo nui. Mahalo nui for sharing. And mahalo for your service. Okay, last up but not least ever, we have Jocelyn Doan, who is participating today because she's a longtime employee at OHA and advocate, always been a community advocate though, even beyond her time at OHA. But while she was at OHA, under her watch, a Native Hawaiian law and traditional customary rights training course was developed specifically for board and commission members, government board and commission members. And it's now a required training. It's kind of evolved over the years, but yeah, now it's required. And so, I've asked Jocelyn to join because to hear that perspective on why, I think you bring valuable perspective to this discussion to talk about why boards and commissions are important, why it's important we engage. I mean, if we had to develop a training course, which is I just want to point to the foresight of that, recognizing that there is significant issues in how decisions are made, and the foresight to say, well, let's create a training course to try and be proactive about getting ahead of some of these problems. I think that's invaluable perspective to bring to this discussion. So mahalo for joining us. So can you tell us a little bit about what you do and why the training course is something, and training decision makers in these positions or members in these positions on Hawaiian issues and Hawaiian rights is important?
Yeah, mahalo for having me. Aloha. My name is Jocelyn Doan. I currently work for the city, working primarily on homeless services programs and affordable housing. So aloha to Ku'ipo, we're a partner with Habitat for Humanity. So I'm looking forward to working with you, continue to working with you guys. But most recently, I spent the last 10 years at the Office of Hawaiian Affairs as a public policy advocate. And as a part of what I did in that role was partner with our community warriors who spent the last few decades trying to hold the state accountable to their obligations to protect Native Hawaiian interests, in particular Native Hawaiian traditional and customary rights, access to water, and protecting our ceded lands, public land trust corpus. You know, and the ways that we did that was through testimony before boards and commissions, especially BLNR and the Water Commission, the Department of Planning and Permitting, Borough Council's Land Use Commission. And, you know, these boards and commissions make decisions that affect the disposition of our resources in Aina in a really impactful, long-lasting way. And one of the ways that our community in OHA advocate has been through lawsuits. And if you look at the success rate of those lawsuits, when we choose to bring them, we usually prevail. And what that means is that the boards and commissions are not making the decisions that are consistent with the law, nevertheless, pono. And so the idea of the training course came from a conversation with my then manager about, you know, why do we think it is that these boards and commissions continue to make decisions that will eventually be overturned, and that, you know, are not good for Native Hawaiians. And, you know, I think what we realized at the time was that many of these boards and commissions are never given any sort of information about what their actual responsibilities are. So if you read a OHA testimony, oftentimes the very first sentence of the testimony will be, or one of the first sentences in the paragraph will be, you have fiduciary obligations. State you have, you know, constitutional responsibilities. The statutes require X, Y, and Z. And we realized that nobody ever tells them that. And so they rely strictly on the attorney generals that are assigned to these boards and commissions for advice on their legal obligations. And so the idea was, we have some great individuals that choose to volunteer their time. And we wanted to see, like, you know, will we see a difference if we actually provided them some education? And what we saw immediately from the very first training was that people were learning things they've never learned before. And maybe sort of better appreciating Native Hawaiian perspectives. And so it was one of the very few things that I think OHA was able to do super successfully, proactively. So much of what we do is reactive. We're so busy, you know, trying to put out fires. And so, yeah, that's kind of the gist behind the vision of the training course. Mahalo.
Awesome, mahalo. And, you know, I'm really looking forward to getting to a robust conversation about kuleana and you know, service and Native Hawaiian perspective and its importance in these various spaces. But before we do, I want to cover some nuts and bolts a little bit about, you know, what if someone is inclined, or if someone is passionate about an issue in their community, and then there's a board identified, you know, that maybe they can there's an interest point there for them to serve on a board. What does the application process or the nomination process look like? And, you know, since you were newly appointed, Lehu, if you can just, you know, you kind of touched on it earlier, your experience with the Board of Water Supply, but can you just talk a little bit about what the process is like and what it entails to, put your name in the hat and then follow through on that, on the next steps?
Yeah, so mine, I think, was a little different, just because It's a city and county of Honolulu kind of jurisdiction, and it was over the transition between the two mayors. So I think it took a little bit longer, but there was basically just a conversation that took place to see whether or not I would be interested in applying. And when I said yes, then there's really just like it's like an hour worth of forms about kind of what your background is and you know, why do you want to do it and what do you think the job entails, and I think just to see whether or not there's a match, and then a series of kind of informational conversations with council members. And so it started off at one of the subgroups that handles the border water supply applications, and then it goes through this formal process, right? So you have to start there, and it's an open meeting to the public, and people can send testimony if they want, and then it goes to the full council for approval. And I think the whole process, you know, over the span of Christmas and New Year's and 2 different mayors took about, I think, 3 or 4 months off and on. And now that the board work is starting, so I had actually just missed the meeting by a couple of days before I got, before I actually was approved by the full council. But I took the time to just spend a bunch of time reading and sitting a couple of meetings with board staff as well, to just gain as much information as possible to be useful as we jump into this season, this year.
Right on. Okay, thank you for that. And I think this is a good segue to something Jocelyn always says, and that's, you know, and I'll just point out that, you know, service, kuleana, it requires work, right? You know, kuleana, you have to awamo kuleana. It's a burden. There's work that's involved, and taking this, you know, serving in a role in this way does require some work. Yeah, significant work and a lot of homework to be done. Jocelyn, can you just touch a little bit about, you know, what you think qualifies someone to serve in this capacity? And I don't mean qualifications as in like pala and like, you know, got to get degrees. Like, you know, what does it entail to serve in this capacity on boards and commissions from your perspective?
Well, I definitely think background experience and pala is important depending on the board or commission. But I mean, a lot of work goes into these boards and commissions, especially when you're looking at a board that has vast responsibilities. So BLNR is a perfect example. Sometimes those meetings go on for 2 days. So you're really talking about somebody that, you know, has the time to do that. And that's not meant to discourage anyone. It's meant for folks to be going in wide open, eyes wide open to opportunities. Of course, other boards and commissions have sort of different levels of responsibility. But personally, from a Hawaiian perspective, I think that you really have to have a sense of kuleana. Like, why are you doing what you're doing? And you know, what powers does this board and commission have, and what opportunity do you have to ensure that our interests are specifically protected? But I mean, I have pretty high standards about who I think should be serving on boards like BLNR and the Water Commission, you know, specifically having management of resource experience or historical experience or understanding, I think is important, just because of how significant those decisions are. Some of those decisions will last beyond all of our lifetimes. So yeah.
Mahalo for that. And I don't know, Kuipo, can you expand a little bit on that? I mean, just in your experience serving various, you know, boards and commissions, but, you know, particularly the HTA, what does the work look like and feel like? And if there's anything that's really gratifying out of it, you know, that really makes it worth your while, is there something, you know, can you describe that a bit?
Okay, so I think prior to coming onto the board in 2015, I'm not sure what was happening in the board or in the agency period. But what I've noticed ever since Nalehu, we did the Aina Aloha principles, along with the strategic plan, there seemed to have been a sense of a shift amongst how board members looked at what needs to happen next in Hawaii. And this was a year, I think, before the onset of COVID, which really sank the industry. So I think there was already a sense of a better sense. I think people had a lot more sensitivity into the effects of tourism on Hawaii's natural resources and our Hawaiian culture and our community. And then of course the fourth pillar is the marketing and branding, which is usually not usual, because in hotels you find marketing and branding at the forefront. And we need to make sure that the perspectives are balanced well. And what's important is our community, our Hawaiian culture, and all the things that money is made from. And the gratifying thing is I get to have a say in what should and should not happen, or what moves forward, like in the sense of the Aina Aloha principles, and what shouldn't take place. One voice is very powerful, because you find people on your board depends on how you display or how you word yourself, or why. They can feel your heart. They know where you're going, and you will have people who will support you. And people will also take a look at, that, you gotta have action behind the talk. It's just not all one way. But the most important thing people will come to understand that community is important. Hawaiian community is equally important and more important, because that is the mother community. And so they understand. I think now with the shift in tourism, I think people understand Hawaii is needed. Okay, so we know this. How we take care of it? How do we provide content? How do we bring this forward in a mindful manner where we have responsible visitors? And I think that is the greatest honor I've had, is to be able to have a voice for the people that don't have voices in these places, because people have voices. And I urge anybody listening to this Aloha Rising, if you can get into your neighborhood board, your civic club boards, your any community-driven board, do so. The voice, there's that saying, "Mai pa'i ka leo," don't quiet the voice. Speak. The voice is important. One voice is one voice more.
Oh.
No speak, one voice less. And we need that. And it takes courage to sit amongst the people that are naysayers. I think we all know this. It takes huge courage, but stand. Stand for the right reason. And that's pretty much it.
Yo, mahalo for that. Those inspiring words. And I think it's a good segue. Well, you touched on, being a voice for the voiceless, and, Hina serving on the Borough Council, the Oahu Island Burial Council. There's multiple island burial councils. But obviously you folks, the strong iwi kupuna advocates, I always hear them talk about being the voice for our kupuna. Can you, just one more, I want to kind of wrap up this nuts and bolts piece about, applying, because, and I want to be honest and share with people, piggybacking off of what Jocelyn shared, about having some expertise and the kuleana, like it is not a simple process to get on one of these various boards. You have to take some steps. You got to submit, for the Burial Council process specifically, which OHA is involved in, submitting nominees to the governor. Can you talk a little bit about what it is that, what are some of the steps that people have to go through in order to be considered for one of these positions?
Yes, mahalo, Davis. When people want to know more information, and I just saw a question on my sharing of this, you can go look at the Office of Boards and Commissions to get a full listing. All you have to do is do an engine search, and it'll take you right to the link for our Hawaii State Government page, and also the respective city and county pages. You just simply have to know, you know, at least how to type in the information. But as all of you can see here, all of the boards, commissions, and councils are here being shared with you. In the case of the island burial councils, if you are to access the application through oha.org, once again, you get onto the site and you type in Island Burial Council, and it will take you to the next step, which will explain a little bit about what the Borough Council is. If we can we click that? Let's do Oahu. Great. And, you know, this is obviously coming from the state site over here, but when it comes to the OHA application, some of you may know that OHA is required to put names forward. What happens after the names get forward is that the governor must send his official governor's message down to the Senate. And it is the Senate that will look at his pick. They will look at his recommendation, and they will choose to either simply have a discussion in and amongst themselves within within a Senate hearing, or they can choose to call upon you and they can ask you questions. I've seen them ask questions of large landowner representatives. You know, that's their prerogative. But again, the process is relatively simple. Filling out an application, again, it can be done on the OHA website. It can also be done on the State Historic Preservation Division website. And I believe that you can also click on the links that come from the Hawaii State Boards and Commissions. So there's, you know, different avenues that you can pursue, but you know, again, your letter of interest and the other information that you're asked for, should your name get submitted down from the governor's office to the Senate and they have a hearing, you will be notified if you have been selected or not. The time of service for the Oahu Island Borough Council is a possibility for 2 consecutive terms, and each term is for 4 years on the Borough Council. And what else can I say? I
that's
encourage everybody to come out.
That's good, Hina. Yeah, and mahalo for that. And every board is gonna be a little. There might be subtle, you know, the burial councils are a little different than the other process because of the requirement for OHA to have because OHA has some appointment authority for some of the seats. Yeah, so there's a channel you can go through OHA, or there's a channel you can go straight to the governor's office. So yeah, just want to share these as examples, and mahalo again. If folks are interested, I would encourage you folks to go to the Boards and Commission website for the state and start there. I'm dropping the link in the Zoom, and then we'll drop that in the Facebook thread as well. There was a couple questions that popped up on the threads about where folks can find information. So I want to make sure we cover that. But since we're here and we have this wealth of knowledge, we're blessed to have all this wealth of knowledge, you know, with sharing space right now. I want to talk a little bit, you know, I know all of us are kind of wanting to have a robust discussion, and Kuipo, you kind of started to touch on it about kuleana and the significance of standing up. And, you know, we often think of standing up or, you know, activism or advocacy in terms of, you know, marching, protesting, providing testimony at the legislature. You know, that's what we commonly think of. We don't think of this necessarily. I mean, maybe some folks do, some of us do, but in common thought, it's not, you know, serving on a board and commission is not thought of as you know, radical activism. However, it might just be one of the most radical forms of exercising your voice, in my opinion. Can be. It's up to the person who holds the seat. So can we talk a little bit about that and why, you know, how serving in this role fits in the larger construct of, you know, placing yourself amongst those who may be opposed to the viewpoints that we're trying to convey as Hawaiians. And you know, Lehu, I'll start with you. Anything you would like to share in that vein?
Well,
with Lehu. Why are you starting with Lehu?
If you know, if you consider the time that I spent as the vice chair of the Native Hawaiian Royal Commission, not a form of protest, then I don't know what is. I was protesting and I was protested against, so that was certainly one that polarized folks. But you know, the opportunity to serve in any of these ways is absolutely not only a form of service, but it's also a form of pushing forward your mana'o and your perspective in the work that goes on. And you know, I mean, you know, the work that I did in film and TV, and the birthing of Oiwi TV and that whole thing, at the base of it was a form of protest. It was a form of protest through education. It was a form of protest to make sure that our voices were heard on these platforms, so that maybe we don't always have to all meet down at the Capitol with our red shirts on. Not that we shouldn't have that as a kuleana, but there are multiple ways to do it, to your point. And I think you know, this journey that I've been on, the being on boards, and certainly the Board of Water Supply, is also to make sure that we're awamuing the kuleana of the resources that are precious in Hawaii. And you know, when we're talking about these resources, we're talking about you know, in some of these boards, the choices that are made with land, the choices that are made and how we deal with iwi, the choices that are made with water. And all of these resources traditionally have been held by people who have taken on this idea of awamu kuleana, to be able to make sure that it's really, we're just, it's not ours. We're holding it, you know, in lieu of the next generation taking it and making sure that the right choices are made as we go. And so, you know, as the way I look at it is that there are new pressures to all of the resources that we have available to us, whether it's global climate change, or you know, the economics of whether or not tourism works in this economy now. And those new pressures have to be met with the kind of perspective that we have held for thousands of years. And in order to do that, you have to show up, and you have to not only show up, but you have to be prepared, and you have to be willing to speak to it in a way that other people can understand some of the perspectives. So.
Mahalo for that.
Mahalo.
And, you know, next, you know, Hina, I want to see what your mana'o is on this. Because in my, you know, from my understanding, you know, the burial councils are really set up to hold that space just in the councils themselves, right? To represent a process to protect iwi within this larger state system. And then there's board members for each of those. But I feel like the burial councils, the symbolism we talk about with one person holding a place in a board, like, can be applied to the burial councils themselves, right? It's meant to hold a space. I don't know, can you talk a little bit about, you know, how that may interplay with, you know, representing Hawaiian perspective and our ancestral ike in the larger state construct?
Yes, very much so. Mahalo, Davis. On the Oahu Island Borough Council, we have, in my time of service, of which I've spent 2 consecutive terms, had 1 year off because it's a requirement after serving 2 full terms. And then I am in my 3rd term, almost to the completion of that. So at that end, it would a total of 12 years of service altogether. And I tell you what, everybody who has been at that table has represented their moku. They've represented the jurisdiction that they live in. And we have also had some good representation from the large landowners. Now, people would think, oh, well, if you're representing a large landowner interest, how is that good? And for us on Oahu, we've been very fortunate that they've not only been fair, but they've been very conscious, very present, and each and every one of our voices individually and as a cumulative have served to advocate and put leadership out there. So with what Kuipo said earlier about being that voice, imagine the incredible power that you wield when, for example, I as a chair, I know I have a strong voice, but imagine that I'm surrounded by people who also have very formidable voices themselves. And when we advocate for Kanaka interests, Kanaka worldview, it is a very rewarding experience to be a part of a council that will advocate justly and fairly on behalf of our ancestors. So when I look at the different ways, Lehu mentioned protesting. Well, we don't always have to go down marching down at the road. We don't always have to show up at the Capitol in protest mode. That's one way to approach things. But the other way, and this is where when it comes to those politically savvy folks who are watching, when we talk about Kanaka issues, some people avoid the word sovereignty. Sovereignty, really, it's talking about empowerment. And so even without considering that word, when we look at empowerment, the way to empower our voice, the way to empower and uplift the causes that we stand behind, how is land used? How is water used? How does tourism affect Hawaii or not? And in this case, how are burials taken care of? Our voices are critical. And we are sometimes just as important as the policymakers of our islands. Even if this were in traditional Hawaii, the setup might be different, but the advocacy is not that far away from what we would need. Traditional chieftainship or current political framework, the idea is leadership. Our communities need leadership, and serving on a board, council, or commission is the way for us to respectfully, diplomatically, and oftentimes successfully advocate and set leadership for the community.
Mahalo for that, Hina. I had another question lined up, but that just made me want to ask something else. But your last statement. But ultimately, I mean, I guess actually, no, I do want to go down that road. Jocelyn, you are an expert in water issues and Hawaiian rights with regards to water. Can you talk a little bit, just briefly, about the impact that a couple of board members who have the ike, have the training, have the background to represent, rural Hawaiian interests on that board, the impact that they can make, and give me maybe an example of that impact?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Water Commission is a perfect example of that. The board and the community have been, every time the Water Commission's made a really bad decision, the board and the community's, sued over it, won, and then it gets overturned, and then basically has taken us decades, in the community decades, to get water restored to streams, as an example. We've had some really amazing, through really, really hard work of a lot of advocates, I think including OHA, as well as the volunteerism of community folks. We've seen a significant shift in the Water Commission composition over the last few years. Oftentimes decisions were made politically. We saw people get appointed that didn't even apply through the process, all because of, the really significant controversial decisions that were coming before the Water Commission. But we've recently had folks like Kamana Beamer, who clearly has background, water and Aina-based background that has helped inform decision-making there, as well as Uncle Neil, who oversaw lands in rural communities during his time at Kamehameha Schools. And we had, I think, one of the very first decisions come out of the Water Commission on water restoration that the community didn't appeal on. It's like unheard of in recent memory. And that's because the decision was fair and took into consideration Native Hawaiian rights and perspectives. So yeah, I mean, we've seen a huge shift. I am a little worried about making sure that shift continues. And that's all about making sure that we continue to get good folks on the Water Commission as these great commissioners time out. But yeah, absolutely. Huge, huge, huge.
Yeah, thank you for that. And there's some comments coming up. Roxanne is saying, asking why the governor and the Senate has to approve board members. And that's that's for another, it's for this discussion, but it's the way the law is structured. It's the process that it's meant to actually be, so that it's not all just the governor making the appointment. So the governor makes his nominations, and then it has to go through what is basically supposed to be a vetting process by the Senate. There's public testimony for these state positions. And then, we can comment, and Jocelyn's very familiar. OHA and the community would often come out and oppose nominations made by the governor. So it's not perfect. But to her second part of her comment, which is, feels like it's meant to keep Lahui out. And I want to share a comment that was made on one of our posts promoting this panel a couple of days ago. And someone commented on the flyer that it said, "Mahalo for you folks holding these positions to disrupt the institutional racism," which I interpreted as, disrupting the power structure. What we don't realize oftentimes is that these boards and commissions make really important decisions that affect our resources, whether it's water, whether it's land, whether it's, budgets and finances, whether it's programs getting approved. This is not just about, natural resources either. There's social services, public services that are governed by these types of boards. So it's really critical. Olelo Hawaiʻi, early learning, state mental health, the mental health field, things that really hopefully are supposed to address many of the needs and the struggles that our community faces and just many communities face. So that said, there is a power structure. Equipo, I'm gonna ask you, because I feel like it's similar. You may have touched on it already, but it can be. I feel like it might be able to expand a bit more. How do you feel if that mana'o, that someone views you as a disruptor to the power structure, the status quo? What does that make you think? And what's your response to that?
That's their kuleana. I have a kuleana, and my kuleana comes with, with honor. It's honorable to have kuleana. I mean, if you don't have kuleana and your parents never gave you any kind of kuleana, then it's kind of almost you don't have that worth, right? So to have some sort of kuleana, the last words grandma and grandpa spoke before you fell asleep, and only you heard that. That's a kuleana. Only you heard that. So to me, it's an honor. So they can say all what they want to say. It doesn't bother me, but I know what I need to do. I wanted to share something that I said earlier, and this is maybe this is not the time and place, but I just want to share how this worked out. So my father had kuleana. He worked for the State Department of Transportation. The Kaahumanu Highway between Kauai and Keohole Kona. Whatever he came across, he was one of the first line guys that walked in, because they were allowed by the boss to walk in first and scope the site. It's about 32 miles of land. whatever they found, they were notified that the Bishop Museum was going to come in to excavate whatever could be found there. And my father ordered the bulldozers and he covered everything. So they were without. After years after he'd passed away, Mama and I found out that they were going to fire my father for doing that. But I know he stood on the side of it. I am a Hawaiian. Nobody knows how to care for these things. To let it go in peace and let it rest was his mana'o. And he did what he had to do as a kanaka Maoli. That was it. Because he understood all those things. Now, he took a hit to have to stand up to his bosses and justify why he did what he did. But did it matter to him? No, he did the right thing. And I think that's the most important for any of us sitting on boards or any school teachers, is for us to do the right thing and to teach the right thing. And we know what is right. We know what is pono. I think anybody desiring to be on a board of sorts, any board they choose, you're not first. Your Ike, as Jocelyn said, your Ike, your knowledge of your schooling, your experience, yeah, you need that. But when you stand there before the people, you are standing there again as their voice, not your voice, their voice. And I think some people have to understand that that creates huge character of an individual. Yeah, we have to play nicely in the sandbox. Our Ali did. For the most part, they did, play nice in the sandbox, not because we want to placate, but because we want to see either resolution or we want to see an advancement of some sort, or we want to have the conversation. I think that's huge. But how do you, some people have a hard time to humble themselves into that space so that you can win in the end, meaning that there is a win-win situation. I also want to talk about, I love the fact that we have so many young people graduating with Hawaiian studies degrees, Hawaiʻi degrees. My scare behind that is, where does that content go if the economy was to turn worse again and everybody has to move out of Hawaii for economic reasons? We need to create, I get the marching with the red shirts, I get that. And yeah, there was a time when that was important to have. And it is still that hope and that desire to still have that fire burning behind us is important. But ku'e in a different way is important. And if we ku'e in a different way by building, you have the capacity for television, others have capacity for radio. If we build the content, continue to build content, our kids can work. The Kapai Mahu story that is on the cusp of not Hoku's, but Oscar nominations. Oh my God. Can you imagine if the plethora of our children were in that space telling our story through that kind of medium? That's what we got, to me, that's where we gotta go. In education, move that education dial towards a really sensitive cultural space. Maybe that's the ku'e in a different way.
That's a bumper sticker right there. That's a bumper sticker. Yeah. Ku'e in a different way. I mean, I think you said almost all of it, Ku'ipo, but you missed the most important one, which is music. Music has held our language and our perspective, and that ku'e in multiple different ways to be able to infuse into the next, and it sparked the Renaissance and multiple things. So thank you for your contribution in that as well. I think, just to maybe build on this idea of disrupting, that it's not only to disrupt, but it's also to build bridges.
Yep.
And that's so critical right now as we see all of the modes of communication purposefully designed to put us in these echo chambers where we're surrounded by people who think like us. And that you see it in, you saw it in the presidential election, that the way at which we are communicating in social media forces these conversations to echo against each other, and that I see these commissions and these boards as opportunities to also bridge, to be accessible and to think about and talk about the kinds of experiences and things that we've learned to folks who maybe haven't experienced those things and didn't necessarily understand that perspective, and to also learn different perspectives because we grew up in a certain place in time and space, and that over the course of really tough topics that are at the right at the edge of, I think, this conversation, that some of these boards and commissions are in charge of figuring out that will pivot where we're going as a state and a community, and where our resources will be spent and used for generations to come. So I think it's also just important that we engage now, because the now is going to inform where we go next.
Awesome, mahalo for that, Lehu. And I wanna we're coming up on an hour. I think we'll go over a little bit. There's one last question I wanna field and kind of let this discussion keep rolling a bit. And it has to do with with management of resources. Yeah, we have multiple Hawaiian trusts, both government and private, that manage Hawaiian resources, or supposed to. Our government trusts, OHA, DHHL, are tasked with immense kuleana. And that entails management of resources, building housing, bettering the condition of Native Hawaiians. I mean, this broad kuleana. And it really comes down to, well, I believe one way to look at it and kind of start to break it up, the kuleana and work that exists, is it comes down to management of resources, Hawaiian management of resources. And serving on these boards and commissions, I think somebody mentioned it earlier, it's provides a training ground. And that said, in that vein, how does this type of service, with relation to Hawaiian management of Hawaiian resources, relate to self-determination? Which I think is, and if that's, sorry, let me repeat that. How does serving on these boards and commissions relate to self-determination, which can be qualified as Hawaiian management of Hawaiian resources? Hina, you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. Mahalo. I wrote in the in our chat, I put the word mana in there. When we think,
it's 3 o'clock.
Thank you. When we think about
so is your secretary? Yeah, thank you.
My secretary. When we think about a government, any government, the current government, an independent government, any kind of leadership, the purpose for having leadership is to help steer a ship, to steer a canoe, to help guide where we're going to go. And part of that structure is the body of people who are responsible for said leadership. In the current system, it is the legislators down at the Capitol. In a traditional system, you have potentially Mo'i or Ali'i Nui, you have his Kaukauali'i, you have his various advisors. There's always a system. That's the power structure. But the kuleana doesn't necessarily change, and it doesn't necessarily go away. So it really wouldn't matter when we're talking about the issues that matter and impact us the most: land, water, as well as things like infrastructure. Yeah. And when we think about the various roles of different levels of chiefs were in place to ensure that our lo'ikalo were taken care of, and that water was managed and maintained, that fishing was observed properly. So the kuleana that comes to us at the various boards, commissions, and councils, if we truly understand mana, we realize that everybody has their role and their responsibility. We are just as important as the people in the legislature. We are just as important as the top leader, doesn't matter, mo'i, ali'inui, or in this case, the governor, or in this case, mayor. It is about people to do the work. And the people who are at the boards, commissions, and councils, if you know how to wear your hat, for example, we may not be able to impose fines or sanctions against something, but we certainly can influence the decision-making and the judgment calls. We can certainly influence policies that are made. We can certainly influence how people carry out the work that is done. So it's critical. But it took me a long time to learn this. But only now do I really understand that when you talk about self-determination, that's the key right there. Self-determination. We must determine, we must define, and we must assert. So I leave you with this word, rather than being, and it was a part of one of my works in school that I wrote about, instead of being a movement of resistance, it is a movement of insistence that we can shift ourselves to. I insist that this is what we must observe. I insist that this is the way that we shall do it. Rather than try to resist, we insist and we channel. We don't have to try to hold back the water. We just have to guide, direct, and tell the water where and how to flow.
Yeah, mahalo, Hina.
Mahalo.
Kind of fielding the same question, you know, how does this type of service and you know, serving in this capacity relate to what can we build from it in terms of how, you know, gaining more access and more authority in managing Hawaiian resources? Is there a way to build on that? Jocelyn, you want to take a stab at that question?
I mean, getting more access, if we're just all applying to some portal, then, you know, the likelihood of the applicants that we'd like to see on the boards and commissions be selected are low. There have been numerous efforts by community folks in the past to set aside specific seats for particular stakeholders, whether or not they be place-based stakeholders, like the amendments that OHA helped get through for the different borough councils, or whether or not there are particular seats for particular expertise or agencies. I think those are great ways for us to ensure that the kinds of people with kuleana or pili to particular places get on. Did you want me to mention the bill that you didn't want me to talk about earlier?
Go ahead.
I mean, I think that there have been many attempts to, for example, set aside seats for OHA on the BLNR, or at least set aside a seat for someone that OHA would select to be in the BLNR. Same thing for the Water Commission. We just had a hearing, we just saw a hearing the other day where we were trying to put Hawaiian representation specifically from the Hawaiian Homes Commission on HHFDC. HHFDC's one of their major kuleanas is to help with housing, deal with the housing crisis in Hawaii, affordable housing. They not only help construct affordable housing, but finance affordable housing. And, you know, there was lots of opposition about why, you know, the DHHL chair or Hawaiian Homes Commissioner chair should be on the board. And I just was shocked, because absolutely the state has a responsibility to our beneficiaries, and there should be particular stakeholder voices, whether or not it's DHHL or not. But yeah, so I think that we have to create policies that ensure that particular voices and people with particular kuleana have space on these boards and commissions.
Mahalo, mahalo. What's the benefit? You know, what is the greater impact of our community of Hawaiians, especially asserting mana in this way, as it relates to Hawaiian management of Hawaiian resources, Lehu?
Well, I mean, the impact is like this cumulative one over, 30 and 40 years of struggle. And the struggle sometimes, in the 70s, you can point to it. You can point to those photos of, all the way back in the 70s with water rights and talking about Waiahole and the Waiahole ditch and how much water would be left for them. And you see that struggle persist and persist and persist. And what happens, I think, is that we've adapted in so many different ways to not only endure the struggle, but also to make sure that our point and our perspective is not only heard, but put back into the way at which these different institutions look at the resource, right? We have, and Jocelyn and you folks who have been, at the tip of the spear with respect to holding the state accountable for this, we have been and are one of the most unique states when it comes to what are seen as rights for everybody. And I mean, I can appreciate, this is the Office of Hawaiian Affairs panel, and we're talking about Hawaiian issues. But I'd also like to say that this is not just a strictly Hawaiian set of issues. This is about how it is that we are going to persist as a community moving forward into the future. That if, and we've seen that with COVID, right? COVID does not care if you're a Hawaiian or Pacific Islander or Japanese or from the US or from here. And what that means is that we are forced to be in a position where we take care of everybody. That's not to say that the conditions at which the NHPI community are different and that can get more people to get COVID. But the point of it is that we cannot cut these communities off and say, okay, well, we're just going to address this part of the community. Same thing with water. You turn the water on your tap, everyone has to get the water. That's the mandate, right? Is that people who want water are supposed to have access to clean drinking water. When we talk about these resources, we have to do it in a way that we're not only using the tools now in the toolkit that we have, but also thinking about, to me, is like thinking forward about how it is that where is the next pivot to make sure that these resources are in place for the next generation. And so this is just like this continuing iteration of how we interact.
Awesome, mahalo, Lehu. And would you like to chime in on that, Kuipo, on that last question? What is the impact of our community stepping into these roles and inserting mana in this way?
I think, mana is attained as we move forward. I think it puts everybody in a good position to be of one heart, one thought, and one love. As we can harness all the positive energies. Yeah, we're going to have some negative, but if we can work it out and harness ourselves in a space where, as Nalehu says, this is not just about one community, one kind of community. It's Hawaii. And how do we, if we're going to preserve and conserve our natural resources, then we have to come to it as a group of people, as a community, a full-fledged community, as communities do. So I think it's a good thing. I think working in this manner, voicing opinions, working on boards that we can cross over and share ideas and see if we can help to provide intel into our own boards, what's happening with another board, and how that affects our kuleana within the boards we're in. I think that's only for making positive in the end.
Right on. Mahalo for that. And yeah, thank you folks again. Mahalo nunui for taking the time out of all of your busy schedules to join us. Again, to kind of wrap this up, boards and commissions, civic engagement, many tools in the toolbox, right? Whether you're exercising your voice by voting, whether you are monitoring legislation at the state or the county and submitting testimony on bills, or whether you are attending your neighborhood board meetings or running for your neighborhood board, which for those of you folks on Oahu, The deadline to file to run for your boards is tomorrow, so you can do that online. And we talked about that last week. And now we're talking about boards and commissions, just another tool in the toolbox. And it's really, you know, we're just trying to touch on as many of these different avenues for us, for our people to engage as possible and highlight the work that's going on in our community by the folks like yourselves who are doing the work and serving in these and serving in these different ways. Because, you know, as much as we hear about our voice not being represented, I believe that the numbers are multiplying. Yeah. Thanks to the work of the great educators that we have in our Lahui for many, many decades. The number of us that are out there and engaging and taking this kuleana and awamoing this kuleana is increasing. There's more of us. And know that, you know, I just wanted to share my 2 cents here to kind of summarize. And what I heard is, you know, it's important for us to represent our voice, but it's also important for us to recognize our kuleana, to malama the entirety of Hawaii. And I feel like Hawaiians, when they get into these spaces, there's a lot of fear that Hawaiians, you know, the unknown, what are Hawaiians going to do when they get into this space? But I mean, from what I've always seen, Hawaiians, like you touched on it, Ku'ipo, we know what's pono, we know what's right, and we're going to make the decisions based on the interests of everyone. What's good for Hawaiians is good for Hawaii, right? So mahalo again. If there's, you know, I'll give you folks, we can go around one more time. Last final thoughts on why this is important, or how you would encourage folks to awamo kuleana in their day-to-day life. Yeah, if you could just share very briefly what you folks think. And Hina, I'll start with you.
Mahalo. No leila ke aloha nui a uko e na hoa kipa a uko e ho'omanawa nui nei. For all those of you, no matter what political perspective you come from, as someone, despite the fact that I work for the Office of Hawaiian Affairs in my day job, I have never ever left my political view of political independence. However, there's much to be said for kuleana. And no matter who's in power, and no matter what the political structure, the kuleana does not leave us. And it is imperative for us to avail ourselves at the various levels of role and responsibility. So for those of you out there who have the heart and have the mind and the willingness to serve, we must advocate for those things that matter to us the most. So mahalo. Mahalo nui.
Mahalo, Hina. Kuipo, final thoughts.
Mai pa'ai ka leo. Just keep the voice sounding, resounding, and aloha kikahi, kikahi. You know, let's not forget each other. One goal, we all go. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui. Jocelyn.
I would just say, you know, for those that are a little bit more sophisticated and familiar with existing board and commission processes, to continue to engage in those spaces and make your voice heard in those spaces, including at the ledge. And then for those that are not, you know, I think that Oha and Davis and his team are such an amazing resource to help you connect with understanding, like, you know, what is something that you're interested in? What is the relevant boards and commissions for you to engage in and pay attention to? You know, what are the links? When do they usually have their meetings? And so you can sort of learn a little bit more about what their responsibilities are. That would be my simple suggestion. Mahalo.
Mahalo. And last but not least, Lehu.
Yeah, ku'e in a different way. You know, really, you know, what I heard go by today is that, you know, the way we spend our time, the service that we give to our community, the things we do in our day jobs, where we choose to spend our money, those are all ways at which we can ku'e and make decisions about where Hawaii goes next. And, you know, these boards and these commissions are just an extension of that. And I would encourage everybody to get involved, because got plenty kuleana to go around. And as we make our way moving forward, we need to be these bridges, and we need to seek solutions that are going to be long lasting. So mahalo.
Awesome. Mahalo nui. Okay. And we'll wrap it up with that. Mahalo nui, gang. And I know that there's a couple questions in the chat, in the threads that, you know, are finding the website. They could use a bit more information. So know that we are working on identifying. So there's over 170 state boards that the governor's office is responsible for. So we're trying to filter through that, you know, our team at OHA, and identify at least the ones that correlate to OHA's kuleana and OHA's mission. And we'll be sharing information about those handful of boards and the vacancies that are there very soon. So stay tuned for that. If you're not on our email list, you can visit us at oha.org/vote and find all of the Aloha Rising episodes there and sign up to get our email blast so that you can stay updated. Also follow us along social media. But this is definitely something that we want to keep our finger on and keep informing the community about, is these board vacancies, the kuleana of the boards, and it'll be an ongoing process. So mahalo nui to all of you for tuning in, and mahalo again to our panelists. Mahalo, mahalo, mahalo. Really enjoyed it, and thank you very much. We'll see you guys on the next round of Aloha Rising. Aloha.
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 Aloha.